Hello, everybody. Good morning in Niteroi, Rio, and good afternoon in Europe. I'm Raúl Lorente, the coordinator of the INSEAI project at Valente University. And we are 8 people here in Valencia following the workshop. And it's a pleasure for us to do the kickoff of the first workshop of INSEAI project. We have a year working on the project. We have do all the teams a lot of secondments, and we have begin with the research about informality in Latin America, and we are to share by this first workshop our research to all the project, all the groups. We are starting the coordination with the local team at Niteroi. I would like to do thanks, obviously, to Madrid team with Yulimar, Vaquero, and obviously Santos, and to the local team with Daniele Carusi, that has had a lot of compiled all the information to that allow to do this workshop. And Ana Viñas too, from the Madrid team, has collected all the full papers. So we have a busy afternoon and night, because we end here at Spain at 11:30 today, and at Romania it will be later too. And well, it's a pleasure how I did to do the kickoff of this first workshop. So I would like to share and to pass the word to the local team at Niteroi. Thanks a lot.
We are going to follow the program. Okay. Now, are you seeing the program? Yes. Yes. Going from Francois. Are you there? Hello,
yes,
Francois.
I'm there. I'm there.
Then you can begin with your speech. Right? I am going to give you the organization for your PPT, right?
You mean I'm supposed to begin now?
Yes, please,
okay.
François, you can.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so I will share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
So, yes.
Okay, I will put it in full screen. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Hola a todos. Very pleased to be with you. Un placer. You've got the luck to be in Niteroi. And do you see the full screen or just no? Okay.
No.
So I will try to put on the
You
full
got the
screen.
full screen there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no, I have to begin again the sharing.
The right.
Let's see.
Button in the right.
How you stop? 1 second. Stop. Okay.
It's here.
Okay. Okay, so I will try it again. I don't know exactly how to do that. I will try. Well, while we try to adjust the screen. Yes, I will adjust the screen. So
En la parte
just
de abajo a la derecha, si vuelves a poner tu presentación.
1 second. 1 second. So I'm happy to be with you, and sorry not to be in Rio or in Niteroi. We will be there in 2 weeks. We are now in Belgium on another conference, and it's snowing here. So I don't know what the weather in your place, but you are lucky. So I will share my screen. I think that maybe it will not be in full screen, but I hope you can see it.
Is full screen is in the bottom right. Right. Okay.
Okay. So
No.
so I don't know how to do, but
Three buttons to the right. 3 buttons to the right.
you
To
should
the
have-
right. First one.
It's
Okay.
left of the 87% figure.
let's
Go
see
to
how
the
to
end.
do
So
that.
three buttons to the right from where you are now. It's okay. It's okay. We can.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, now it's nice.
So
Wait.
But if you.
just to tell you that I'm happy to be with you, and I was very ambitious when I proposed the title. Thanks for the organizer, and with the idea that what's new in research in informality since the 70s. I think that after the time was going on, it was for me a good idea to do that, because I began not in the 70s but in the 80s with informality. But as time passed by, the stress is higher, and well, at the end of the day, I've got now nearly 100 slides, and I'm not sure that we'll be able to show all of them. So the motivation of working on the informal economy, I think that it's clear for everybody. There is this idea from the focus on labor market that the poor are depending on labor income to survive, and generally the households. And in many countries, the informal employment is huge, especially among the poor. Among the main questions, you've got some macro questions like is it a subsistence or dynamic economy, integrated or marginal sector, and also linked to the question of structural change. And at the micro level, one classical question is working in the informal economy, is it a choice, the exit option, or a constraint? So what I will present here is a personal perspective, and in a sense, my last will. I think that I will die soon. And I've been working for nearly 40 years on the informal economy. I'm not the only one. I may not be the most famous one. I think about Gary Fields, who began with theoretical model in 75, first publication, and just published a book 2 years ago on the job ladder and informality. My point of view will be a point of view of statistician and economist. I'm both, and I've been working in various institutions, national statistical offices in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. And I try to work with the team, research in statistics and with some methodological issues I will present here, research in economics, and also try to get a foot in policies and also informing the democratic debate and training. And in terms of tools, I will present basically some quantitative tools, survey modeling, which is the major part of what I've been doing during these 40 years, but also some qualitative work. But the perspective I will present here is limited to quantitative economic informal economy analysis. I've been working in various projects based on the survey we designed, and the last one was 5 years in Brazil at UFRJ. In front of the sea, you can see UFRJ from your window, from the one who are in Niteroi. I wrote various books in Mexico, and here it was my PhD thesis at the end of the 80s in French and in Spanish and other countries of the 3 continents. And my main contribution on the informal economy in the field of statistics and is the design of mixed surveys, what we call 1 through 3 survey, and their derivative. And here you've got the application in various countries of the world, not updated. So what I will present today, some general consideration, a point on concept definition and views, measurement issues and the up and downs over time in this issue, and if I've got time, some pieces of personal research, collective research, as illustrations. So for the one who are already bored with what I say, I present my main takeaways for this presentation. First, insisting on the decisive role of statistician. We will see that later. The progress over time, it's a mixed picture. And here I ask the question, who in the room and at the end of the day can answer for whatever country in the world, what about this question, did informal sector production increase or decrease over time? And I pretend that it's impossible for any country in the world to answer this question. And third point or third conclusion is a relative disappointment, maybe because I'm too old now, and maybe also because I had too high initial ambitions, because the idea when you've got 80% in some country of the labor force working in the informal sector or informal economy, you have to solve the mystery of growth or of development. And of course, nobody can pretend do that. And the good news is that I think that there are still a lot of new avenue of research for the new generation of economists. And you are probably with the project beginning something new, obviously avoiding the dead ends. And my main recommendation is be creative, focused on data collection, original data collection. So rapidly, what is, according to me, the main change in economics and statistics over time and linked to the research on the informal economy? So in economics, you've got the progress in econometric techniques, causal attribution, impact evaluation, the idea of counterfactual, experimental and quasi-experimental approaches. That's the positive thing. Negative one is not the abandon, but the less focus on macro analysis to more micro analysis, letting without answer all the question of general equilibrium effect, and also in modeling the decline in many type of macro or micro modeling. There is also on the micro side this idea of what I call the causal attribution obsession with the RCT hegemony, with the problem considered as the gold standard in policy evaluation. And the problem with this method, which is interesting, but not more than many others, it can only answer to a limited number of policies or projects, and also it has limited external validity. And also the change from ex post or from ex ante to ex post, which is linked to macro to micro evolution. In statistics, we had a lot of evolution, positive evolution in concept and definition, informal sector initially, then informal employment, then informal work and informal economy. In data sources, repeated first snapshot, but after that repeated cross section, panel data, match databases, employer, employee, and also matching with administrative data, specific survey, for example, to evaluate some project, and also adding some new topics like governance issue, corruption, trust, and crime. But at the same time, there is some decline and negative evolution, in particular, and we show that in informal sector analysis, and there was not to be substitute, but the introduction of informal employment at the beginning of the 2000s make that informal sector analysis showed a decline. And also in surveys dedicated at measuring this informal sector in terms of production or economic unit, like the household enterprise survey, and finally a demand side survey, like an income expenditure survey with an informal dimension. So I'm not sure, but maybe I'm wrong, and you will show me the contrary, that there is a global stagnation in terms of interpretation about the big questions, and in particular because it doesn't exist yet comprehensive theory of informality. And now I can't move my slide. My slide is blocked. Okay. Okay, to go a bit on this modeling, because it was one of the project and the topic, I think that there is this sort of end of the road in macro or macro modeling about informality. And the steps were input-output tables. In this case, there was no agent, so the models, input-output models, introducing other agent, but with fixed prices and no behavior. And then general equilibrium models in the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, disaggregating households, introducing price flexibility. Then there had been the micro simulation, taking into account all the survey with all the household or individual, introducing behavior, and then putting this micro simulation into general equilibrium models. But at the end of the day, all this modeling, and I followed all these steps, practicing all these steps. I think that the final conclusion for me was too much complexity, too much ad hoc hypothesis, and at the end of the day, a black box, and it was not possible to really understand what we were doing and how our result come from. So if you think of what we need to model the informal economy in a macro perspective, you need a social accounting matrix, and here demanding in the sense that you need crossing products, household, economic function, intermediate consumption, final consumption, investment, export, import, and all this by formal and informal status. So imagine the requirement of data you need. And then when you add to this and dive this sum into CGM, you need functions, function of production, production function, consumption, export, import function, price flexibility, and then adding financial sector and dynamics. So you can understand that going this way, for me, at the end of the 90s, I stopped trying to go further. Where I think that the progress are the most visible is in concept, definition, and approaches. In the 70s and in the 80s, the end of the 80s, I was doing my PhD at INEGI in Mexico. There was as many different definitions as researcher, and we can see it by the name which were employed and are still employed, like popular economy, underground economy, unregistered, unobserved, hidden, informal, illegal, gray, black, shadow, in the open sun, moonlighting. So you convocate the moon and the sun, and we were in a general confusion, and maybe also because of the heterogeneity of the informal economy and the variety of factors of being informal. In the 80s to date, there were, and there still are, three main economic schools of thoughts. The dualist view, like informal economy, the original one is a subsistence economy and should disappear with development, neo-Keynesian type, and the policy implication were or are targeted policies. The structuralist view, the informal economy is subordinate to the formal economy to stop contracting the behavior of firms. Behind this were reduction of the cost of production and delocalization with globalization, and also the idea of reserve army. It was by the initial were by Castells and Portes at the end of the 80s, and the policies were more protection. And then the legalist view, which came later, and one of the former author was De Soto in Peru at mid-80s, with the idea that the informal economy is made of micro entrepreneur, which are very productive, the startup nation, which were trying to escape public regulation because the public regulation were tentacular, and also the policies associated are deregulation. So if I look at what I suggest in my PhD thesis, these three schools and one of the last school of thought proposed by Delano in 2022, I think that we are still in the same vein. I don't think that there are many progress in this. Maybe one progress is that the idea is not to say the informal economy is according to one of the schools, but the idea is there is a coexistence or a combination of these different segments or reason for being in the informal economy, and depending on the characteristic of the firms or the worker, you can be more driven by exclusion or by exit. And also there is this work by INSEAI in Brazil trying to quantify according to the different school of thought which one are of which type. In all these cases, the exclusion are the majority, maybe for the legalist or neoliberal. They are the only one to think that informal sector or informal work is voluntary chosen. So some question focus on the question of informal economy heterogeneity. The classical critics is that informal sector is too heterogeneous to be meaningful. And here you've got two views for those believing in that, is or reject this concept, and it's more among other social scientists than economists, but there are a lot which reject this idea of using the concept of informal economy or disaggregate it. I think that the partition in two is relevant, even if we can go further. The relevance of the concept, now the definition, I will come back to that, is based on the relationship of no de jure or de facto relationship with the state, is relevant in terms of research and economic and public policy. Second point is tautology. Obviously, if you've got a partition in two, a partition in three is better than a partition in two, and a partition in more disaggregation is by definition, so there's no discussion in this. So if you say my division in three sector or three segment is better than your division in two, it's logically evident and tautological. Third point, the relative heterogeneity. In reality, informal economic units are more homogeneous. That I wrote the contrary. Informal are more homogeneous than formal ones. If you look at formal, your advocate and Petrobras, for example, imagine the heterogeneity between these two, your butcher and Petrobras, as informal economic units, the variance of all the production indicators and also the manpower is much more homogeneous than the formal sector. Fourth, the fuzziness, the idea that the frontier are unclear between formal and informal, but it is by definition when you make typology, classification, it's always the case. Just think about consumption and investment. No economist is discussing this point. And what is the difference when you look at it? It just, if this product consumed during 1 year, less than 1 year is consumption, more than 1 year is it's investment. I can take also the example of poverty. If you are below the threshold of the poverty line, you are poor. If you are above, you are rich. You are not poor. And around the poverty line, you split between poor and non-poor arbitrarily. Maybe one thing that it's not the main, okay, there is a bit of fuzziness, but no more than in other fields. But what maybe is more important is that in some countries, and in the case of Brazil, we work on that in a paper, is the decreasing advantage of formal job over informal ones. So that the quality of the two sectors, which are being more and more similar, not yet, but more similar, but not the split between the two. Fifth point is about reliability. It's in fact more reliable to collect data, or the reliability of the answers of informal entrepreneur, on-account worker are more reliable than the information you get from formal firms. Everybody knows that a national sport in many countries, developing countries and also developed countries, from the north or the south, is double accountability, the one for official purposes and the one, the real one. Then going back to the typology, in terms of disaggregation, there is, okay, we can go beyond the division in two parts, formal, informal. And so in terms of informal firms or businesses, there is this idea of upper tier or lower tier, and fields at the beginning of the 90s advocate for this and still advocate for this today. There is also a typology in three by Michael Grimm and his co-authors, with the idea of distinguishing top performer, survivalists, but also what they call constrained gazelle, that the one who have all the input to be productive, but who are not. And the idea is unlocking their potential. Now, the typology in terms of job. I think that in Latin America, informal employment analysis is much more popular than informal sector analysis. And so you've got the split into formal versus informal, but there is also the idea to distinguish, which is not often made in Brazil and other countries, distinguishing between wage workers, between formal wage worker, informal wage worker, but informal wage worker working in the formal sector or working in the informal sector. That's an important division. I will turn back to this. And the same thing for self-employed, distinguishing not only one category of self-employed considered as independent or as informal, but distinguishing between formal and informal, and they are very, very different. So now, in terms of definition, concept, the statistician eliminate in a way the confusion by international recommendation. The last one in the field of labor was in 2023 by the ILO, but also other institutions, for example, for the national account, the UNSD, the statistical division of the UN, is now with a new version of the national account system 2025, and the formal and informal split will be integrated fully. And so clearly distinguishing the three components of the informal economy between of the non-observed economy, between informal economy, underground economy, and illegal economy, which are different components of the non-observed. And if you look at the table here, you see that the size of enterprises, the attitude toward the state, the way to measure these components, and the way these kind of economy, non-observed economy, is integrated in the national accounts and the GDP and all the macro indicators are very different. So definition accepted by the statistician and by more and more economists which used empirical data derived from the labor force survey, for example, produced by the national statistical offices. For the informal sector is a sector of firms or quasi-firms which in law or in practice are not covered by formal arrangement. And another context is informal employment. In this case, it's not firm but jobs, and with the same definition, not covered in law or in practice by formal arrangement. By the statistician, these two concepts were not substituted. But if you look at my chart, you see that informal economy, it's just n-gram viewer accounting, and you see that informal economy is still of interest for researchers, but you see that from the mid-90s, informal employment substitute the informal sector works, and they are not the same at all, and I think that's a regression. What is new in the new resolution by the ILO in 2023 is the definition of informal production. Before, informal production was the production of the informal sector, but now it's added to this the production of household which produce for own final users, both goods and services. A third component is informal production by non-formal, non-profit institutions. And a last component is within formal firm, it's considered as informal production, the production associated with formal jobs, which with partly informal productive activity. And this is more linked to is a way to approximate the underground economy, which is a real measurement gap in high-income country. For informal sector, what's new? Now, the idea of formal or informal arrangement is the way to define informal sector. And the changes, limited one is before it was at least producing at least some of their goods, and now for the market, and now is mainly for the market. But more importantly, it includes agriculture, and also it's the definitive exclusion of the size of enterprise to define the informal sector, which was the most common way to measure informality in the previous times. Two last points of novelties with the new resolution is to go from jobs to work. And so informal employment is just one part of informal work. You have to add to this volunteer work, which is not employment, unpaid trainee work, which is not employment and jobs, and own use production, divided between formal and informal status. And the last novelty is to introduce the idea of dependent contractor, which is quite specific to a platform job, Uber or other platform services, with the idea that usually the job status distinguish between dependent worker, wage worker, or contributing family workers from independent workers, which were the self-employed and employer. And these dependent contractors are in between these two categories. And so here there is the idea of, and I can show that here, to introduce the dependent contractor, which status of formality or informality will not depend on the status of their contractor, but of the status of their own business. And so that's the novelty we've got in concept and definition. I think that it's quite clear, and now the idea with the national statistical offices is to produce a statistic in line with this, and as it's new, it's not yet the case, but it's on its way. Now, there is the challenge of measuring the informal economy. And for this, there is necessity, especially for informal sector, that's economic unit of ad hoc survey. And there is this idea of mixed survey. I contributed to design this kind of survey, which I will present, household enterprise survey. And with the first experience were in Mexico at the end of the 80s, and I showed, I've shown some of the extension in the world in my mic previously. And so the idea is an extension of this mixed survey is the 1, 2, 3 survey, where you've got three kind of survey, nested, grafted one to the other. One is a augmented labor force survey. The second one is an informal production unit. And the last one is sort of income expenditure survey with integrating the formal, informal split. So I won't enter into statistical technicalities, but the way to make surveys, and that was the case in the past, to informal firms previously in the last decades, were to have a sample frame of enterprise and then derive some informal economic unit. But in this case, escape from this, all the firms which are taking our activity without professional premises, like in the street and also in-house. And depending on the country, they are a huge part of the informal sector. And here you've got the example of the problem of the two methods to measure the informal economy. In Vietnam, we had the chance to implement this mixed survey, household enterprise, and there was the classical way at the end of the 2000s. In 2009, the official number of the direct survey, enterprise survey, was 4 million informal economic units, where in reality, the measurement through mixed survey identified 10 million. So there was a massive underestimation of bias and in the estimation of totals. At the same time, this type of survey, which survey informal localized firm, have a rosy picture of the informal sector and the output and outcome of this sector, because they are the visible ones, and so the performance is much better than the most marginals. So finally, in the case of Vietnam, we estimate that the underestimation of the GDP was very important. In fact, at this time, it was not taken into account for political economy reason, because it would have said that NSO, local NSO, was not doing its work well. And also because for Vietnam, being poor, a poor country, allows the country to have public development aid, which was not the case if Vietnam were classified as a middle-income country. So I will show very briefly some example of how to measure this according to this kind of survey. In labor force survey, the idea is to identify jobs and then ask for the registration. In this case, there is a lot of type of registration. It's a questionnaire applied in some sub-Saharan African countries, but the same way applied in Asia. And so you can define informal according to the legal status. You can define informal sector for the independent worker, which can be done, for example, in Brazil with the PNAD, but also for the dependent worker, wage worker. In PNAD, you are not able, in many other countries in Latin America, you are not able to identify informal employment in the informal sector. I will turn back to this. So here you see the figure 10 years ago. It has been updated, but what I want to say here that employment in the informal sector is the major part of informal employment, and the informal employment in the formal sector is limited. So just think that when you don't distinguish this, you are aggregating people working in Petrobras or HSBC or whatever big international bank without protection, with colleagues which are protected. So it's informal job in Petrobras with the one working when you go maybe eating outside in the informal sector, working alone in the street. And all this is informal employment. Putting all that together from a research and policy consideration is not satisfying. And here you see that also that the same graph distinguished by kind of jobs, and we see that the part in the formal, informal in the formal sector is only a subpart, and here you've got the informal part of the informal sector jobs are the main part of the informal jobs. So it's key to distinguish them, which is not done. And here you can see that what I show here is the wage workers in the informal sector, which means that they have informal jobs, but they are in the informal sector, and they are very different from the same one, which are employee in the informal sector, informal job in the formal sector, which are here. And they are as numerous depending on the country. Informal employment is present everywhere. in the public sector, if you've got the example of Vietnam, also in foreign direct investment enterprises. So there are no specific sector where informal employment, informal job is excluded. Obviously, all jobs in the informal sector is informal employment. Now I turn with the second phase, which has been not abandoned, but has not the impetus it had previously, to try to capture the informal sector firm from a firm perspective: production, behavior of investment, credits, debts, etc. It's key to get this kind of information. And in the 1 to 3 survey, this is the phase 2 of the survey. This survey has various positive characteristics. First, it's a matched employer-employee survey, because with this firm survey, you can catch the diversity of the employees according to the demographic characteristic, but also the characteristic of the jobs. But mainly, and we'll show the results, is to try to rebuild the account of these informal firms, because they don't have any formal accounting, is to identify the destination of the production. Where is going the production of the informal sector firms? And the same, the backward linkages, the origin of the input used by this sector. And so, well, I passed some of the innovation, for example, measuring corruption with this. So what is the result of this? What show in a few illustrations? First, the golden number. All over the world, we have been implementing this survey. The average size of the informal sector firms is 1.5, which means that if you've got half of them with one own account worker and the other one employer and one wage worker, you've got the average size of the informal sector. And this is without putting the size within the definition of the informal sector, which means it's analytical result. Second, we can measure where is going the production of the informal sector. Is it going through subcontracting to the formal sector? Here you see in various countries of Africa and Vietnam that mainly informal sector production is going to household consumption. And nearly no formal sector, no public sector, which is a lever for policy, subcontracting the informal sector. And if you think in terms of origin, the origin of the input of the informal sector is the informal sector itself. All the data are fundamental, in particular when you want to have to analyze the integration or not integration of the informal sector to the rest of the economy. Okay, so here, this table, I won't detail, but what I want to say when I say it's not possible to capture the production, the evolution of the production of the informal sector, is because the prices, the deflator of the informal sector, to try to compare the evolution in real term between 2 years or 2 periods, has nothing to do with the existing deflator. It's not the GDP deflator, it's not the industry deflator, which is appropriate, irrelevant, it's not the consumer deflator. And so you have to build, and with the survey it's possible, we have to build specific deflator to compare 2 years and add the evolution of production in real term. Okay, a word on corruption. So illustration, corruption, the rate of corruption in informal sector units in some African countries is not as high as we have imagined, but mainly because a lot of them have no contact with public authorities. And when they are linked to public authority, they are in relation, the rate of corruption is much higher. And obviously, it's difficult to produce statistics on corruption. Here we measure it in Vietnam, and so we draft a book. We try to have a part on informal sector and corruption. We have some censor, and then we call them informal fees, and then new censor. At the end of the day, we publish a book with a white page with no information on corruption because it's a very sensitive issue, at least in this country. And the last phase of the 1, 2, 3 survey is, as I say, an income expenditure survey where you list the products, you want the quantity, the unit price, the total value, but also the place of purchase, where have been bought the products you consume in the formal sector or in the informal sector. And here we can see that maybe I can show this table according to the type of households and the type of product, the share of the product, the consumption which has been bought in Madagascar in the informal sector. And it's 4 quarters for all households with a decreasing pattern, but even in the 4th quartile, 2/3 of the consumption come from the informal sector. So if you touch in terms of macro movement, if you touch the income of the richer, of the public agent, for example, or the one having formal jobs, if their wage move, you've got a direct effect on the informal sector. Okay, maybe a few words on dynamics. So studying dynamics in terms of macro analysis, the classical question, is the informal sector pro or contra-cyclical in terms of jobs, of production, or productivity? Also, the monitoring and evaluation of projects and policies needs dynamic data and analyze the dynamics. And obviously, at the micro level, the transition on the labor market are fundamental. For example, are informal sector workers trapped in informality, or are the informal sector jobs stepping stone to better jobs? And in terms of earning dynamics too, is there a penalty or a premium for informal workers? Are informal sector jobs better or not, taking into account other dimensions? And does informal sector earnings vary along the earning distribution? So I show some example, repeated cross-section in Madagascar. And here we see clear a contra-cyclical movement. In time of crisis, the informal sector develop in terms of jobs. So it seems to validate the idea of the informal sector as a buffer. Here you've got an example for Madagascar and Vietnam. No, Madagascar here, but it has been done also for Brazil, Vietnam, and other countries, showing that I won't develop this matrix, transition matrices between sectors, but showing that the idea that or the informal sector is a way that you don't move, steady state, or is the stepping stone to the formal sector. You've got movement in all directions, and so it's neither a dead end nor a stepping stone. And the analysis of this matrix is very fundamental. And here another type of passing to informal sector firms. In Peru, they are measuring these informal sector firms, and here you've got the dynamics trying to measure the value added between formal and informal firms over time, and in terms of comparison between the two sectors. It's a repeated cross-section, and here we try in Vietnam to have panel data of household businesses formal and informal, between 3 rounds. And what we see here is the transition between the different status, informal, formal, and also the question of attrition. Okay, so that is the interesting thing of looking at the transition, not only at the job level, but also at the firm level. Here you've got the same kind of measures of transition of firms, and we can compute mortality rate, creation rate, survival rate, and what we see is the huge dynamics, micro dynamics of the informal sector, in this case, in the case of Peru. Okay, and now I don't know if in terms of policy, maybe we can turn that to back, but we try after, let's say, 30 years of research to draw some policy implication of what we have found. And at the end of the day, it was a bit the weak connection between research to try to feed policies. The general objective is to favor formalization of the informal sector, and at the same time support the informal sector, and we preside in particular women-headed. But we see that these two objectives are contradictory, so there is a trade-off, because if you make the informal firms more attractive, the formalization process will be slower, and also to promote protection and probably universal protection. So I don't go to the 10 commandments of the policies. I just finished. I don't know how many minutes I've got. Maybe it's finished. Please, if there's some time, or I'm out of time now. Raúl, por favor.
Yes, you have time. You have 10 minutes. So
Okay, so I will present to end this presentation by a few examples of research I've been doing with my co-authors. Example as illustration, trying to mobilize the information from the survey I mentioned before. The first one is informal employment, COVID, and crisis. And the idea is to see the crisis, what we call the canonical crisis, that is that in time of crisis, informal employment is a buffer, or informal sector employment. What we see here with data from Brazil and Mexico is that it's exactly the contrary. The informal jobs have been the one most affected in the country, much more than the formal sector, which is exactly contrary to the classical hypothesis. So the idea was to look at previous crises in Brazil. And here, with the data we've got in Brazil, you can analyze the COVID crisis, the crisis of the 15th, and the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. And what we see here is that for at least the two last crises, the informal sector paid a higher price in terms of jobs than the formal sector. So at the contrary, at what is usually proposed by the theory. And here we go further. With the data, we can do that, the micro data, but there are some information, macro information. And the idea is to see what is the reaction of the informal sector, informal economy, during the crisis in Brazil since the beginning of the 80s. And what we see is that when you've got a plus, that means that informal employment is rising, and so which is what we call the canonical effect of the crisis on informality. It was true during the period between the 80s and the 90s, and progressively it begins not the case, and even the contrary with the last crisis. And so there is a procyclical behavior of informal economy during the crisis as time go by, at least in Brazil, which is quite surprising and deserve more attention. Second example, earning gaps, premium or penalty. I won't detail, we've done this job trying to estimate with panel data, fixed effect, and quantile regression. But what I would like to show is about distinguishing informal sector independent and formal sector independent worker. And what we see here, the red line is a premium for the formal sector. And what we see is that there is a systematic premium of formal sector independent worker and a huge premium, nearly 40%. And so they should be distinguished, formal and informal independent worker. And that it's also the case for wage worker. If you look at wage workers, the informal wage worker in Vietnam and Madagascar are suffer a penalty to formal wage workers, to informal wage workers, and so the necessity to distinguish between wage workers, between formal, informal worker in the formal sector and informal worker in the informal sector, it's decisive. And also you've got all this idea that along the distribution, the penalty for informal worker is higher in the lower part of the distribution, but much better and in some case positive, a premium in the higher part of the distribution. Okay, all these were based to try to see if there is segmentation or are informal sector bad jobs on the idea that it's based on the earnings. But a comprehensive measure to try to see if the hypothesis of exit or exclusion, is it chosen or is it something that is constrained by the capacity of absorption of formal firms? And so the question of job satisfaction is key and not very common in labor force survey, but I think it's something that should be collected much more systematically. And what we see here is that, and that's the case of Vietnam here, but we've replicated that in various countries, and it's systematically the case that informal jobs or informal sector jobs are systematically less satisfying than the formal ones. So the idea that they choose their work because they can benefit from many things, and in particular for women, the possibility to, when there is no institutional care services, or that they have other kind of benefits. At the end of the day, and in average, the quality of the job in the informal sector are much lower than in other sector, and also systematically in all countries, the public sector jobs are the most appreciated. Well, it was just a chart like this, correlation, and conditional correlation show that taking into account many controls, that the informal sector wage workers' satisfaction is lower than all other sectors except agriculture in the case of Vietnam. Do informal firms, another paper, gain from formalization? Again, with Vietnamese data. So we estimate difference in difference with fixed effect, different specification with panel data. And what we show is that there is a positive effect of formalization on firms, but this effect is due to the larger firms, the one in this case, there is more than one worker in the firm. It's not self-employed workers. There is no effect of formalization, causal effect for the self-employed, but a positive effect for the bigger firms, which means that the one who can benefit from formalization, and we try to see the mechanism here, access to markets, more competition, is the bigger firm. And so the survivalists don't benefit from formalization. Tax enforcement and formalization. So here again, we try to test this idea that is tax benefiting from help to transit from informal firm to formal firms. And here we used panel data of household business. That's a firm for household, both formal and informal, to be able to measure the transition between formal and informal status and crossing it with localization of the tax administration and in different specification, including instrumental variable, we show in this case that tax enforcement is positive, the positive causal effect on the formalization process. So it's at odds with an idea that with more tax enforcement, there will be more escape from the formal sector. Last example before conclusion, platformization and informal jobs. Is there an informalization of the labor market? And here the example is from Brazil. And what we see with these earning gaps, we compare with the delivery worker and driver, Uber driver and delivery worker, the earnings compared to other informal jobs and formal jobs. Obviously, there is a premium, an increasing premium of formal jobs in Brazil over the platformized workers, but there is also not so much difference between the informal sector, and during the crisis 2020 and 21, the informal sector worker, the informal jobs, were earning more than the delivery, the Uber workers. And if we take the big picture, like a synthetic approach of the evolution of platform worker in the job space, so we took a lot of characteristics of the jobs, and with these characteristics, we built with a multifactorial analysis the axis. So axis 1 is bad jobs, again, good jobs. Axis 2 is weak attachment to the labor market to stronger attachment to the labor market. The platform worker, as here, nearer from the informal worker than the formal worker, but also the evolution over time is going more and more towards the informal workers. So there are some conclusions to draw from this different example. I go back to my conclusion, which are the same that I presented, but with what I think could be discussed. So the decisive role of statistician to get a uniform and I think relevant definition of what is the informal economy in its different components. There is progress over time in the evolution of the measurement and the analysis of the informal economy, but we are not still able to answer the basic and first order question: did the informal sector production increase or decrease over time in real terms, because of this problem of specific production price of the informal sector? From my point of view, as I said, I may be a bit too old. My ambition are, sorry? Yes, somebody is talking. Well,
Thank
I
you.
can stop here. I can stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francois. It has been a very, very interesting conference that has shown your huge experience, and we can see a huge panorama about informality. And I would like to point your structural view at the links between informal sector and formal sector. And thank you very much. Probably we have time to 2 or 3 questions. I don't know if local can say yes if we have 15 minutes probably for questions, something like that. 2 or 3 questions?
We got time. We got time, right? Okay, we got time.
Perfectly. So you can ask Francois about that.
Do you hear, Raul? Do you hear me? Raul?
Yes, of
Hello?
course. Of course, yes, yes, I can hear.
You see the program, the next session is at 2 p.m. Right? We have time for some questions to Professor Rowan. Okay?
Perfectly. Let's go.
Sorry, I don't know. I didn't catch the question.
Probably one is that you say the relevance of a statistician, but when I read your first book, that I think that it was your PhD, you do some qualitative research, and what do you see? What do you think to complete the quantitative view with some anthropologistic view, some socialistic view, with qualitative interviews, or to clarify some aspects of the research, Francois?
Okay. From the title of the conference, I suppose. I don't know. I have an echo. Somebody has a mic open. Okay. So from the title of the conference, I suppose that the conference was organized and attended by purist economists. And so I concentrate on modeling, macro, micro, and I thought that it was only economists, and so I don't go in other fields. But my view on that is first, and now I'm doing more and more qualitative and quantity research. So I'm quite convinced that in the field of the informal economy, mixing the methods is not only useful but decisive. And I didn't present what we've done in other. I focused only on empirical quantitative analysis, economic analysis. So I'm sure about this. After that, the idea, I think that the idea of not going back to the confusion in terms of definition of what is informal and what is not is something that should be controlled. So if you include a huge variety of type of activities within under the informal label, the discussion will go back to the confusion we were in the 80s, because everybody was talking about different things, not comparable, and we were not able to have any progress. We were not talking when we had dissent on our results. We didn't know if it's because we are not talking about the same phenomenon, or it's because we are different view and we interpret differently the same phenomenon. So clearly, I don't know if the project intend to have qualitative part, but I think that it should be done.
More questions?
One question about Vietnam, that I think that is a country that you have did some research about informal labor at Vietnam. Have you seen a lot of differences about Vietnamese labor market and the characteristics of informal sector at Vietnam with informal sector in Latin American countries?
So the idea of going to Vietnam, going to Vietnam after working in Mexico and then in various sub-Saharan African countries was with the hypothesis that in this fast-growing Asia, Southeast Asia, the informal economy should be different. And in particular, the idea that the informal economy should be more connected to the export sector and maybe more productive, and that was the idea. We've been there, and in fact, after the survey, we realized, and I show some comparative table, the structure of the informal economy is nearly the same. The gold number of the size of the informal firms is 1.5 exactly. The structure of the consumption, the input, why they are here. Maybe one difference, and I don't know if it has been done, and I didn't see it in Latin America, is in Vietnam, we asked in those countries where we put this kind of survey, there was a question, do you want that your own kids work in the informal sector? And in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's a huge part, and I think that there's a lot of growth, they were proud of working in this sector, and they say, oh, yes, a majority of them answered that it's okay if my kids go on with my business. In Vietnam, there was the idea that everybody wanted to go to the formal sector, and it was sort of a shame to work in the informal sector. But the basic structure and integration of the informal sector, the picture is more or less the same in all the continent I've been working with the data.
Yes.
Yes, François, thank you very much for your really impressive presentation. It was a bit exhausting to go with you through all the fields you have done research in your track. I wonder if you have some evidence on the relation between informality, informal economy, and migration. So at least in Europe, we have some evidence on the regional and the local level that there's a certain relation between immigration waves and the increase of the informal sector. And that also there's a bit of ambivalence judgment on the informal sector, that it can, some observers say it could work as catalyst of integration into the whole society, just transits through a phase and a stage of informality. Do we have some evidence on this?
I didn't work at all on this issue. I think that it's a very interesting issue. If I looked at the intuition, it's like migration will increase the labor supply in one place, let's say in urban cities. If you've not the same amount of labor demand, it should increase informal sector, informal jobs. But I think that it's an interesting, well, basically it's the original question, because if we come back to Lewis and Aris Todaro works, the idea of the rural-urban migration and the informal sector was a key issue. But personally, I didn't dig into this question, but it should be done too.
One question, François. Thank you very much for your full, very complex explanation. I think a feeling at the end, I think a feeling have a feeling with your explanation. Is you think that you have promoted informal activities, particularly women heads, and at the same time to promote the universalization of welfare state, which part the of your thoughtful or which part of your explanation is the fiscal resource, where we find fiscal resource for universalize the social policies and at the same time maintain or promote informal activity on informal employment.
Okay, I'm sorry because the connection here is very bad, so I didn't catch the question. But I think, like I see on the
question is where you put the fiscal resource for universalization of social policies, when at the same time you say that it is necessary to promote at least maintain the informal employment.
Yeah, I think that it's a trade-off. We know that it's a trade-off, and the trade-off in economics, according to me, are part of the democratic debate I think that the two objectives, making informal firms more productive on the one way, because informal firm, whatever the rate of formalization, if ever, informal economy is here to stay in many of the global South countries. So making them more productive is a goal of policy, and at the same time protecting the jobs and protecting the people working in this informal economy is also a policy objective. And we see that they are both contradictory. This trade-off, I'm not able to solve it. I don't know if it can be solved technically or economically. And I think for me, it's part of the democratic debate to choose what is the mix of the two, which has to be chosen in a country or another. But about the question, maybe it was the last, but I see that in the picture that one of our PhD students is present. Joao, I see you here. And so all the questions you have to me, you can ask them to Joao and see if we teach him good things or not.
Question out. Right.
Another question.
All questions.
I have another question.
I will speak loud.
Okay. Nice to meet you. I am from Mexico. I'm a tax lawyer, and I'm working at the Legal Institute from UNAM. And I'm here because I'm interested to know about the informality and the taxation, but in Mexico, we have a huge problem. That is that the social security is decreased. And there are now, since a few years ago, we have a special drugstore that has belonged to the drugstore and a clinic, a private clinic that is very cheap. And now all people that have social security, and also the people that don't have social security, go to that kind of business in order to attend their illness. And I think that in Mexico there are we don't have a very nice social security. And now, what do you think about this kind of businesses that are like substituting the social security for the private security? because they're a low cost, but in the day of the people is like sometimes they don't have to pay anything, or sometimes they give a special like a gift donation. But what do you think about that?
If I think that usually with the social security and health coverage, you've got public sector which is cheap but the quality is low, and private sector where it's is more expensive and with better quality. But you think to describe something with a private sector at a lower price than the public sector, I think that the question of the quality of the social security is a key question, and it's also a key question because many can think, why would I be, because social security is also the criteria for defining the informal jobs being or not being covered by social institutions, social security protection institution, public ones. So I think that the fact that the social security service is so bad is a factor of increasing informality, both by definition, but also because people may say that why should I pay taxes or part of my wage or my earnings to that service if I can buy something better in the private sector? So I think it's a key issue to address this problem of the quality of the protection of, in general and in particular, of the informal workers.
And the problem is with the state, there is a parallel state with the traffic. This parallel state creates a new social security, very low price. More questions? Okay, thank you very much, Francois.
Good luck for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Francois. It has been a pleasure to share your knowledge.
À bientôt. Au revoir.
Now we go to lunch and come back at 2 p.m. 6 in Europe, Central Europe. Okay? Come back in 1 hour and 20 minutes. Okay?
Yes, it's okay. We take a break. Take a break too.
Now is the time for lunch. Bye. See you later in a quarter, 1 hour and a quarter. Right?
1 hour?
And a quarter.
Okay.
And 15 minutes. 1 hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Strong relation between I'm from education association, but I worked as a study for 30 years with local government, head of government or different